intervened decisively in the elections on December 27th. In these elections, the people overwhelmingly voted against a government that has been associated with corruption, that's been associated with extraordinary rendition, rendering Kenyan citizens to Ethiopia in their attempt to support the United States war against the peoples of Somalia. Now, after stealing these elections, and this is a government that has stolen billions of dollars, and their reports, called the Anglo-Leasing reports, that has brought this out. The Kenyan people voted decisively, but this government stole the elections, and there was uprising in the country. This uprising went out of control, and regrettably, thousands of people have lost their lives in Kenya. Kofi Annan is leading negotiations to bring peace to Kenya. The government is being most intransigent insofar as the government is negotiating while stalling, believing that there is a limit to which Kofi Annan will stay in Kenya. Now, because of the tenacity of the Kenyan peoples and because the United States understands how delicate the situation is, at first, the government of the United States recognized the Kibaki government. But in the face of the opposition from all the allies of the United States, the European Union, the Canadians, the Australians, the United States backtracked and supported negotiations. So these negotiations have been going on. And a month ago, the Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs went to Kenya and made a very alarming statement that ethnic cleansing was going on in Kenya. Now, without taking time to study the situation, the U.S. government has been making a number of blunders. Now, Condoleezza Rice is in Kenya as we speak, and this morning she met with Kofi Annan, and she's now meeting with Kibaki and Raila Odinga, and they're calling for power sharing. Power sharing is well and good, but it holds great dangers. Power sharing without democratization of the society, without a new constitution, without holding those who stole money accountable, without ending Kenya's alliance with the U.S. war on terror, without presenting people of Islamic faith as terrorists in Kenya, then there will be continuous problems in the Kenyan society. So those in the peace movement in the United States, those in the peace and justice movement, should be supporting efforts for peace in Kenya, but not peace at any cost. Peace with justice, peace to ensure that there is no impunity in Kenya.
Professor Horace Campbell, I want to thank you for being with us, speaking to us from Jamaica. He is the professor of political science and African-American studies at Syracuse University in New York. And I want to move on now to the centerpiece of President Bush's visit to Africa, HIV/AIDS policy known as PEPFAR, or the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief. On Sunday, he visited an HIV/AIDS clinic in Tanzania and urged his successor to continue funding treatment programs. Funding for HIV/AIDS programs in Africa increased to $15 billion under PEPFAR, and President Bush is now promising to double the amount. Many have criticized the legislation's emphasis on abstinence and restrictions on family planning. Also, we're joined by two guests. A good sense of how the HIV/AIDS programs funded by President Bush translate on the ground. David Bryden with us, a spokesperson for Global AIDS Alliance in Washington, and Lori Wen is with Harvard School of Public Policy, researching impact of U.S. HIV/AIDS policies in Rwanda, a country President Bush will visit on Tuesday. Let's begin with you on the phone in Kigali. Lori Wen, what is the United States doing? What is President Bush offering in Rwanda right now around the issue of HIV/AIDS?
Amy, can you repeat that question, please?
What is President Bush bringing to Rwanda around HIV/AIDS? What is the U.S. policy around AIDS?
I think I'll maybe leave the policy part to David Bryden, who's also on the call. Since I'm in Kigali, maybe I can brief the listeners and viewers on the realities on the ground of what poor, sick people are actually experiencing and how and what they're experiencing on the ground.
Go ahead.
Okay. So I am here doing some work in connection with an organization called FXD, which provides direct services to poor people in rural Rwanda and in cities in Rwanda who are infected or affected by HIV. And through that work, I have spent time with, for example, women in rural Rwanda who may have 9 or 10 children who don't have enough money for food, who have to walk half an hour to get water, and who have to gather branches just to cook. And in terms of abstinence only, in terms of family planning, provisions that President Bush is now proposing, again, for PEPFAR 2, can we look this woman in the eye and say, PEPFAR is really designed to help people like you, or is PEPFAR more a political game? You know, is it more about trying to boost the ratings of a president with low approval ratings? So if you ask that woman 5 years ago, 10 years ago, if we could offer you family planning advice and services, would you have appreciated that? This woman would probably say yes. And there are many women like her who feel completely disempowered in controlling how many children they have. So I think policymakers, President Bush, and voters need to think about this. When the U.S. government talks about a policy to help the poor and the sick, do they really have the ultimate interest of the poor and the sick in mind, or is it a political game?
Laurie Wen is speaking to us from Kigali, Rwanda. David Bryden with Global AIDS Alliance is in Washington, D.C. What is PEPFAR 2? Explain, David Bryden.
Yeah, PEPFAR 2 is the expansion or continuation of the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief. That's what PEPFAR stands for. And what's being debated right now, and what Laurie's referring to, is a number of questions regarding what should be the future course of that program, of this PEPFAR 2, which would go from 2009 to 2013. President Bush is in Africa saying he wants to be an equal partner with Africa and respect and observe what Africans want to do on this program. But in fact, what he's doing back in Washington is something very, very different. And there's no question that there are a number of reforms that are needed when it comes to this program. Africans have made clear that the abstinence-only emphasis within behavior change programs has got to change. We also see a number of problems when it comes to the breadth of the program, and it needs to do more to support community health workers. So there are some real changes that are needed, but unfortunately, on those issues, President Bush is standing in the way. And that's the reality that's not being brought out, unfortunately.
In what way,
I'm afraid
David?
In what way is he standing in the way?
Yes.
Yeah, what's happening right now is the White House is weighing in a debate in Congress, and in fact the vote in committee, in the House Foreign Affairs Committee, will be next week, in which he is insisting that the program actually be kept at its current size, in fact flat funded every year for the next 5 years. That's what his program actually amounts to. A number of members of Congress, including Senator Biden and a number of members of the House, are on record supporting a much higher figure, $50 billion. And the reason being is that we need to include many more things in this program in order to be effective. We need to support healthcare system strengthening. We need to do more on TB and malaria. We need to do more to help orphans and vulnerable children. And with enough support, African countries can use those resources effectively. But unfortunately, the president is weighing in, and a number of his allies in Congress, Congresswoman Ileana Ross-Lehtinen and others, are weighing in and propagating a number of myths about the program and the reforms that the Democrats have proposed to distract attention and block the reforms that the Democratic majority has proposed. So we've got quite a debate in Washington, and it's going to come to a head next week. And what Laura is referring to when it comes to family planning is one of the hot-button issues. And it has to do with the question of whether the United States government will ensure that when a woman goes to an HIV/AIDS clinic for her HIV/AIDS treatment or for treatment to prevent the transmission of the virus to her newborn, when in labor, whether she can get family planning advice and services at that same clinic. The Bush administration is saying no. Under no circumstances should she get those kinds of services. She has to go elsewhere to get those services, some other clinic, some other place. And what the Democrats in Congress and a number of Republicans are supporting, some moderate Republicans are supporting this as well, are saying that no, a woman should have, as Laura was saying, the right to receive that kind of information and services because it's actually in not only in her interest but in the interest of her family, for safe pregnancy and for family planning.
David Bryden, we're going to have to leave it there, but we'll certainly continue to follow this controversy in Congress next week. David Bryden, spokesperson for the Global AIDS Alliance in Washington, D.C. Lori Wen was with us on the phone in Kigali, Rwanda. She is with the Harvard School of Public Health. This is Democracy Now!, Democracy Now!